The year is 950. The wind howls across a desolate fjord as a man is dragged before the Viking council. Torches flicker, casting shadows over faces carved by battle and hard winters. The accused trembles. His crime is theft. To him, it may have seemed small, a handful of grain stolen to feed his starving family. But to the Vikings, it was an offense against order, honor, and the gods themselves. There are no judges in robes. No juries, no lawyers to argue his case. Instead, he stands surrounded by chieftains, warriors, and farmers, all of them staring at him with cold eyes. His fate will not be sealed by laws written on parchment, but by traditions older than memory itself. Some whisper that he will pay with silver. Others murmur that he may lose his freedom. A few believe he may lose his life. This is Viking justice. Brutal, unflinching, and terrifying. A world where your crime was not just your own burden, but one that could curse your family, stain your name, and strip you of the only thing more valuable than gold. Today, we'll uncover the shocking truth about Viking justice, and why you never, ever wanted to commit a crime in their world. And our journey starts with one of the most dangerous mistakes in Viking age. To be a thief. Imagine a hungry farmer in the dead of winter. His children are crying. His livestock has died in the snow. Desperate, he slips into his neighbor's storehouse and steals a sack of grain. In his mind, it is survival. But in Viking eyes, it is dishonor, because stealing was not just taking food. It was violating trust, the glue that held their fragile society together. The Vikings had no prisons. No cells where thieves could be locked away. Justice was swift, and punishment was brutal. If you were caught, you would be dragged before the Thing, the great assembly where laws were spoken aloud, and your fate decided in front of your community. There you could face 3 possible punishments, each worse than the last. The first was fines, but not small ones. A thief might be ordered to pay in silver, livestock, or goods equal to far more than what he stole. And if you could not pay, your family was forced to pay for you. To steal was to risk bankrupting your kin and staining their honor forever. The second punishment was slavery. A thief could be stripped of freedom, reduced to a thrall, forced to serve the very people he had wronged. You would eat their scraps, toil in their fields, and live as property, your life no longer your own. And then came the harshest fate of all, outlawry. To be declared an outlaw was to become a ghost in your own homeland. No one could give you food, shelter, or protection. Anyone could kill you, and they would face no punishment. Outlaws were hunted like animals, their names erased from memory. Some starved in the wilderness. Others were cut down by those they once called friends. It was a fate so feared that many thieves chose slavery over exile. For the Vikings, theft was not a small matter. It was a crack in the shield wall of society. If a man could not be trusted with his neighbor's grain, how could he be trusted to stand beside him in battle? Trust was survival, and those who broke it paid dearly. But what if the crime wasn't stealing grain, but stealing a life? In the Viking Age, murder was a crime that could not always be punished with steel. Sometimes it was punished with silver. If theft could strip you of your freedom, then murder could strip you of everything. But in the Viking Age, killing was not always met with an axe to the neck. Sometimes it was settled with silver. This was the law of Wergild, literally, man money. Every life in Viking society had a price. A thrall, or slave, was worth far less than a free farmer. A chieftain's blood could cost more than a dozen common men. To kill without cause meant you were expected to pay this price to the victim's family. Pay it and peace could be restored. Refuse, and you unleashed a blood feud that might burn for generations. Picture this. A Viking warrior strikes down a rival in a drunken brawl. The next morning, he is dragged before the Thing. His family scrambles to gather silver, cattle, even land to pay the blood price. If they succeed, the feud may end. But if they fail, the dead man's kin are given full right to vengeance. They may kill the murderer, burn his home, or hunt down his sons and grandsons until the debt is repaid in blood. This was justice in the North, not a system designed to protect the killer, but to restore balance. Because a killing was never just between 2 men. It threatened the peace of entire families, clans, and villages. Wergild was meant to stop endless cycles of revenge, but more often than not, it only delayed them. Some killings were beyond payment. Treachery, cowardice, or the murder of kin could not be erased with silver. In such cases, execution awaited. The guilty might be beheaded, hanged, or cast into a bog as an offering to the gods. The stain of such crimes lingered long after the body was gone. Even sagas tell of the horrors of blood feuds spiraling out of control. In Jarl's saga, a feud begins with a single killing and ends with homes burned, families wiped out, and fields left in ash. The message was clear. Murder was not just the taking of a life, it was the unraveling of society itself. But not all crimes could be paid with silver. Some ruined your soul. In Viking society, there was one treasure more precious than silver, more valuable than land, and more fiercely guarded than gold: honor. And nothing shattered that honor faster than adultery. Marriage was more than love. It was a contract, a bond between families, and often a political alliance. To betray it was not only a personal insult, but a public scandal. A husband who discovered his wife in the arms of another man could demand punishment not just for her, but for her lover as well. And the penalties were designed to wound more than flesh. They were meant to wound reputation. Imagine a woman caught in the act. Her hair might be cut off in front of the entire village, stripping away her beauty and marking her with shame. She might be paraded half naked through the settlement, mocked and humiliated until her dignity was ground into the dirt. In harsher cases, she could be beaten, tortured, or even executed, her death a warning to every other woman who dared betray her vows. Men were not spared. A man who slept with another man's wife could face savage beatings, castration, or exile. And sometimes he might be killed outright, his blood spilled not just for his crime, but for the insult it brought to the cuckolded husband's household. Because in the Viking world, adultery wasn't only about passion, it was about power. It threatened lineage, inheritance, and the honor of an entire family line. Sagas often record the ripple effects of infidelity. In the Laxdæla saga, love triangles and betrayals lead to duels, feuds, and death. One forbidden embrace could ignite wars that consumed generations. In this way, adultery was seen as a spark capable of burning entire clans to the ground. The shame was worse than the pain. A thief might repay what he stole. A murderer might pay Wergild in silver. But adultery was a stain that no amount of wealth could wash clean. Once branded an adulterer, your name carried dishonor that could outlive your body. For the Vikings, honor was everything. To die bravely on the battlefield brought eternal glory. But to be remembered as a cheater, a liar, a breaker of bonds, that was a legacy worse than death itself. But adultery was still a crime of flesh and passion. There were darker sins in the Viking world, crimes that reached beyond the human realm, into the shadowy world of spirits, curses, and forbidden magic. Among the Vikings, strength and honor ruled the day. But in the shadows of the night there was another power, feared, respected, and condemned all at once. This was sorcery, the forbidden art known as Seder. And to be accused of practicing it could be as deadly as raising a sword against your king. Seder was a kind of magic believed to bend the threads of fate itself. It could predict the future, curse enemies, bless harvests, or bring storms crashing down on rival fleets. Women known as Völvas, wandering seeresses, were often welcomed to settlements, treated with awe, and paid richly for their visions. They carried staffs of carved wood, wore cloaks of animal fur, and sang chants said to pierce the veil between worlds. But not everyone was permitted to wield this power. When women performed Seder, it was seen as mystical. When men attempted it, it was seen as shameful, unmanly, dishonorable, and dangerous. The sagas tell us that men who practiced witchcraft risked ridicule, exile, or death, because to the Vikings, a warrior who turned to sorcery had forsaken the strength of his sword and stained his masculinity. Accusations of sorcery were no small matter. To be branded a witch or a warlock was to be set apart, feared by your neighbors, and hunted by your enemies. Punishments were brutal. Some were drowned in icy rivers, their bodies left to drift as warnings. Others were burned alive, their ashes scattered so their spirits could never return. And in many cases, sorcerers were simply banished, left to wander the wilderness, abandoned by gods and men alike. The sagas whisper of women put to death for curses that blighted cattle, for spells that brought sickness, for whispers that drove warriors mad before battle. Even the mighty chieftain Odin, father of the gods, was said to have practiced Seder, yet he too was mocked for it by his enemies, accused of womanly weakness. For the Vikings, magic was a paradox. They feared it, they used it, and they killed for it. To wield it was to hold power over fate itself, but to be caught misusing it was to be condemned by society. The boundary between respected seer and reviled witch was razor thin, and one accusation could end a life. Yet even sorcery, with all its terrors, was nothing compared to the greatest betrayal of all, the crime of treason and cowardice, when a Viking turned his back on his lord, his shield brothers, and his honor. If theft could rob you of freedom, and murder could rob you of life, then treason and cowardice could rob you of something far worse, your honor. And in the Viking world, to lose honor was to lose everything. Loyalty bound Viking society together. A warrior owed his allegiance to his chieftain, his shield brothers, and his kin. To betray that bond was to betray the very core of who you were. Treason was not simply a crime, it was the unthinkable. It was abandoning your people, breaking your oath, and tearing apart the trust that kept the shield wall strong. Imagine a Viking battlefield. Spears rain down, shields clash in thunder. The shield wall is locked, each man depending on the one beside him. And then, in the heat of battle, one man falters. He breaks rank, he flees. The wall collapses. Warriors are slaughtered. A single act of cowardice could turn victory into ruin. The punishment for such betrayal was merciless. A coward might be branded, scarred permanently with the mark of shame. Others were mutilated, ears or noses cut away, so that their disgrace was visible to all. Some were exiled, driven from their homeland with nothing but dishonor as their companion. And in the most severe cases, they were executed, their names condemned to infamy. But the punishment did not end with death. Because in Viking culture, memory was everything. A brave warrior's name might be sung in sagas, remembered long after his bones had turned to dust. But a coward's name lived on too, spoken only in scorn, mocked by generations. To die without honor meant no seat in Valhalla, no feasting in Odin's hall, no eternal glory. Instead, your spirit was doomed to wander, forgotten or despised. The sagas speak of men who turned on their lords, who betrayed allies for silver, who fled the field of battle. Their stories are told not to honor them, but to curse them, to remind every Viking that fear and treachery were worse than death. For the Vikings, there was no greater crime than betraying your brothers or showing cowardice before the enemy. Because wealth could be regained, blood could be repaid, but honor, once broken, was gone forever. And this was the heart of Viking law, not just punishment for the body, but punishment for the soul. A system designed not only to control, but to remember, which brings us to the truth at the core of Viking justice. The punishments were brutal. Outlawry, slavery, torture, execution. But they were never just about pain. They were about balance, about memory, about ensuring that the community survived in a world where survival was never guaranteed. For the Vikings, law was not a shield to protect the guilty. It was a sword, ready to strike down those who broke trust. And unlike today, justice was not concerned with forgiveness. It was concerned with reputation. To live dishonored was worse than to die bravely. To be remembered in shame was a fate darker than death itself, and that is why no Viking ever wanted to break the law. Because punishment did not end with the body. It lived on in the stories, in the songs, and in the whispers of generations. Viking justice was eternal. So which punishment shocked you the most? The outlaw hunted like an animal, the sorcerer burned for forbidden knowledge, or the coward condemned to eternal shame? Let us know in the comments below. And if you want to uncover more secrets from the age of the Vikings, make sure you subscribe and join us for the next raid into history.